You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Archaeotech Podcast, episode number 103. I'm your host, Chris Webster, with my co-host, Paul Zimmerman. Today, we talk about underwater 3D data and the maritime cultural landscape. Let's get to it. All right, welcome to the show, everybody. Welcome, Paul. How you doing?
Doing pretty good today. Chris, how you doing?
Good. It's such a weird feeling to be so far ahead on this show. Just so everybody knows, we're recording this before the SAAs. In fact, it's like mid-March. And if you're listening to this in real time, it came out in May. So we're a little bit temporally displaced from the podcast right now, which is unusual for us. But I just wanted to, we're going to talk about some really cool maritime archaeology here in a second. But before we do that, it's not very often we get immediate feedback from something. And I'll let Paul introduce that and then introduce the email that we got. So take it away, Paul.
Okay, immediate feedback. I can't imagine anything more immediate than this. I go about my daily routine when I get up in the morning. I walk the dog. I put away some dishes. I read the news, and I check my email. And there's an email commenting about the App of the Day segment that we did a few episodes back on an app that I reviewed called Clone, Qulone. I got this response email about the review from the people who make Clone before my podcasting app even popped up to say that morning's episode of our podcast had come out. So either they're avid listeners of our podcast, in which case, great, or else they've got some really cool bot that's out there finding references to their product, and also kind of cool. So anyhow, I'm just going to read the content of this email really quickly because it answers a couple of the questions we brought up in that App of the Day segment. It says, hello, Paul. Thank you for mentioning us in your podcast. We'd like to explain a few important things so you can have a better understanding of the capabilities of Clone. One, Clone doesn't require an internet connection, so it's a very good option for scanning artifacts on site. Well, that was a question that you had, Chris, whether or not it needed an internet connection, and there we go. Perfect answer. Two, and this was in response to problems I was having using it, minor problems, but good answer. It says, number two, when you get spikes or cones on your models, you have three options. A, use the new vertical back mat. You can access it in the Get Mat option. If you recall from the review, I said the first thing that you do is you print out a map, a checkerboard, and then you place the object on top of it. Well, the vertical one stands 90-degree angle right behind the object, and then you can use that in conjunction with the one that's laid under the object to help reduce these kind of spikes and to get a better quality scan. That was something I didn't notice. It says new vertical back mat, so I don't know if it was part of the product when I reviewed it or if I just failed to notice that was an option. Then option B is you can merge two scans from different poses. This is intriguing to me. I wonder how many different poses we can do. I haven't had the chance to play with this yet to really see how good of a model I can get by scanning things from multiple orientations, but they clearly are thinking about how one might use this, their product. C is use the flattened top as you did, which is what I used with very good success in one object that I scanned and mediocre success on another one. The third point they make, they say, Clone is optimized for archaeological artifacts, especially when the hybrid scan is set to on. Take a look at these examples, and we'll put the examples in the show notes here, the links they gave us, but they've got a couple YouTube links and Sketchfab. And they rounded out like, please let us know if you have any questions. And thank you again for helping spread the word. Well, we're glad to. And I'm really glad that they have this focus on archaeology. So I'd mentioned when I was reviewing the app that there was a pop-up that said, hey, we have volume purchasing for schools, for example, which I thought was really interesting because I've never seen a pop-up ad in any product I've used for volume purchasing. It's something that's very important to us at school where I work, but it's not something I've normally seen pushed. So I thought that was pretty, showed some good forethought on their part. Well, sending us this email with which showed that they clearly listened to what we had to say about the product and directly answered a few of our questions shows great forethought, and the fact that they use it for archaeology and that they have legitimate examples. They actually have an example of an archaeological project that Clone has been used on. Really intrigues me. So, I would like to have some representative from the company talk to us about that product, or maybe an archaeologist that used it, because they seem to, from my perspective, be really thinking deeply about how this product can be used productively in educational and scientific environments. And again, it was pretty easy to use, and with minimal effort on my part, I got decent scans. So I'm sure that with a few other things like maybe this back mat or maybe merging different scans as they suggest, I can get much better outcome than the okay outcome I got the first time through.
Yeah. And did you remind me, did you email them to see if they'd come on the show, and did they respond to that?
I did email them, but I just have the general email info. So I've got to dig in a little more deeply, because I really would like somebody from the company to come on and talk about it. I think that could be an interesting episode, because again, they use it specifically for archaeology, and have that as one of their markets in mind for end users. And I think that's great.
Well, if they don't ever respond to the email, maybe we'll just mention it in our show notes again, because they clearly pay attention to that. I doubt they listen to the podcast.
They're picking it up. They'll call us, right? Please.
I know. Like, I doubt they listen to the podcast regularly, but they've got some bot that's like mining the internet for when they're linked back to, and we linked them in the show notes. So, or, there are services out there that will look for mentions. And since clone is spelled so uniquely, QLONE, that's a pretty easy word to search for. So they probably found it that way. But then, to their credit, like you said, they must have listened to the show, because very specific things were mentioned in the email, which is, again, admirable of them to be paying attention to that. So, well,
that brings up something that we discussed a little bit about the App of the Day segment when we had our 100th episode recently, and how we like to have it not just be strictly tech, but also the human side of tech. And so here, if they did use a bot and found mention to their product on our podcast, even if they'd never listened to the podcast, didn't know of its existence, they did listen to their App of the Day segment, and they heard and they responded. So that was a nice fusion of tech and human element, and a very nicely, very clearly written email to us that got us both pretty happy that they sent to us. And, that's why we're mentioning it again.
Yeah, absolutely. So, okay, well, that was great. Let's get on to our topic of the day, which is basically maritime technology. So I think I saw this article linked somewhere online. Somebody shared it, and then I went and took a look, and it's open source. So we're going to link to this in the show notes. But the name of the article is Integrating Aerial and Underwater Data for Archaeology, Digital Maritime Landscapes in 3D. And it's by Jonathan Benjamin and others. And it's actually not an article, but it's a book chapter from an edited volume called 3D Recording and Interpretation for Maritime Archaeology from the Coastal Research Library, number 31. So it's like an edited journal maybe or something. I'm not exactly sure what that is, but it's 2019. Just came out. Again, we'll definitely link to this in the show notes. So,
and shout outs for them for putting it out as an open access, freely downloadable PDF. That's huge, I think.
Absolutely. And I like that it's split up into the specific chapters, and that's all I downloaded was this chapter, but you can go download the entire book if you want and check it out. So, that's pretty cool. All right. So one of the things that I really like about this, and I guess before I get into that, my takeaway from this entire article, it was almost a summary of 3D reconstruction techniques, so to speak, or things that add to a 3D reconstruction of a site. It was a summary of all the things that were available, and then how you can use these things to really bring it all together into a digital maritime landscape. And I've never really thought too deeply about underwater archaeology. I've interviewed underwater archaeologists before. I've talked about it before, but this article definitely brought some stuff up for me that I hadn't actually considered, and some ways that they think about under archaeology, and that you have to think about sites, and it's stuff that I hadn't even thought of. And this is about bringing all those data together, not just aerial, but underwater data, and really painting that picture. So.
Yeah, I was thinking about it. I'm glad that you say that you don't pay too much attention to underwater archaeology. Neither do I. I see it, it gets highlighted, especially like on National Geographic and things, as being really whiz bang way cool. But the barriers to entry to underwater archaeology as opposed to terrestrial archaeology seem much, much higher. Training, a potential for physical harm, getting the bends or whatever. The very different methodologies that have to be used because of the submerged artifacts and because of the expensive equipment that has to be brought to bear. It's something that I professionally have never really thought about a whole lot. And it feels almost tangential to the kinds of terrestrial archaeology that I'm used to. So it's interesting that you said that you also don't pay it a whole lot of attention. But in reading this article, there were a lot of things, just like with you, that sparked ideas, interests, especially around how one defines a site.
Yeah, and I think, instead of really going through this article piece by piece, because we don't have any of the authors on, we just kind of found this a few days ago and we decided to talk about it. So, we can't, with those disclaimers, we can't really discuss in detail the technology and things like that they're talking about here. But what I would like to bring up to our listeners, because it was brought up in my attention from reading the article, is really defining what the heck we're talking about here. Because you think they call this digital maritime landscapes, and they said underwater data for archaeology in the title. And so I think when a lot of us think of underwater archaeology, we think of one of two things. We think of shipwrecks and we think of buried coastal sites. Those are the two things I think about. But what they're bringing up here is not, okay, first, if you just take those two things, shipwrecks and buried archaeological sites, very different sites, because those ships, they were either destroyed or fell in place, like maybe they deteriorated or something like that after neglect.
Yes.
But a lot of times they were destroyed or burned by fire, or maybe there's some sort of conflict. Either way, they sunk and they ended up on the bottom of some body of water. And then at that point in time, the site formation processes started to take over. And as the ship deteriorated and, currents happened and more soil was laid down, things like that, animals came in, fish, other things, then that's how this site was developed. But other sites, buried coastal sites that were once above the water, or underwater coastal sites, I should say, that were once above the water, they went through their own set of site formation practices when they were constructed, when they were used by the people that did that, and then sat for who knows how long before eventually being covered by water and then affected by the water environment. So those are two very different things. But I think the third component to this that I had never really considered was when you're talking about a digital maritime landscape. One thing he says that, a lot of times, or one thing they say in the article here is, and they quote Westerdahl, one of the more cited resources in here, as talking about the landscape, the physical landscape where maritime archaeology takes place. So you might have, let's say, a boat that was constructed right there, but it for some reason failed and is now underwater there. Well, that boat is an archaeological site, but all the wood and the things used to construct that boat were taken from places around the nearby area, theoretically. So trees were cut down, other things where it happened. People were constructing this boat partially on land and then partially on the water, probably. And the settlement that took place to be able to do that, the people lived and ate and all the things related to that, that's all part of the maritime archaeological landscape. And I don't know why we keep separating underwater sites and not underwater sites, above ground sites, or, I don't know why we separate those when they're in a coastal environment, because they're very much tied to each other. And it's just not something I'd really put a lot of thought into before.
Well, and these are a lot of the things that I started thinking about upon reading the article. They not only mentioned sites that were like buried after the last submerged after. You see, I can't even get away from the terminology I'm used to thinking of in terms of terrestrial archaeology. That were submerged after the last ice age, but they talk about things like there's an example of a shipwreck site or abandoned ship, perhaps boat. That's in a tidal area, right? So it's partially exposed part of the time, partially submerged part of the time. And I think about that, we've vacationed up in Cape Cod a number of times. If you go around there, like Wellfleet and thereabouts, you have a lot of old bits of piers and things that are sticking out into the mud flats, and those mud flats get submerged part of the day and then they're exposed part of the day. And so this kind of liminal zone between being terrestrial and being aquatic doesn't even have to be a one-way trip like these old sites that got fully submerged. It can also be something that's an ongoing part of the existence of the site as it's used day to day. But when we make our maps of sites, I know I have in the past, if they're near water, you tend to, that's the edge. Inland might extend as far as your shirt scatters go, right? But when you get to that water's edge, that's the edge of the site. And we know that it's not, but I think that maritime archaeologists know that it's not much more intensely and innately and with much greater subtlety than we landlubbers think about that edge of the site.
Yeah, and that's the nice thing about this article is they first spend a little time defining that boundary, and how some of these 3D reconstructed techniques can start to eliminate that boundary, and how we can use these different techniques to basically bring all this together. And a lot of that is related to photogrammetry. So photogrammetry can be used underwater, it can be used above ground, and then it can be used to bring all this stuff together. But not just that, but what they call bathymetry, sonar, underwater, LiDAR, things like that. And we can use all these concepts to just bring this entire model together, basically eliminate the water, eliminate the vegetation on land, and presumably eliminate the vegetation under the water, but I'm not exactly sure about that. And then come in all at once here and bring this into one big model where you can add and remove the water, but then see how the landscape was affected and how the landscape was impacted by the cultural things that were taking place on this land. So let's take a break real quick, and when we come back, we'll dive a little bit deeper into some of these things, and we'll probably have to reignite our, drone drinking game. So back in a second.
What's the easiest choice you can make? Window instead of middle seat? Picking a vendor who sends a great gift basket? Outsourcing business tasks you hate? What about selling with Shopify? Whether you're selling a little or a lot, Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. From the launch your online shop stage to the first real-life store stage, all the way to the did we just hit 1 million orders stage. Shopify's there to help you grow. Whether you're selling scented soap or offering outdoor outfits, Shopify helps you sell. Wherever and whatever you're selling, Shopify's got you covered. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/try. Go to shopify.com/try now to grow your business, no matter what stage you're in. Shopify.com/try.
Now back to the show. All right, welcome back to episode 103 of the Archaeotech podcast, and we are talking about maritime archaeology and maritime cultural landscapes. MCL is an acronym they use throughout the article here, and which I really love. Thinking about cultural landscapes has really been, I want to say, a new concept in archaeology, only relative to the fact that archaeology has been around for, depending on who you talk to, probably 120, 30 years as a real thing to do. And it's only been, honestly, in the last probably few decades that we've really been starting to talk about landscapes in archaeology, and not just the sites, but what's going on around the site, what's going on to help create this and do this idea. And this person, Westerdahl, who I don't know more about him, but he's apparently huge in maritime archaeology. And he wrote this paper in 1992 that pretty much changed everything, where said, listen, we need to be thinking about stuff outside the water too. You know that, right? That's basically what he said. And go from there. So I did mention before the break that we were going to get the drinking game on. So I hope you've got your beverage of choice, because we're probably going to talk about drones.
Drones and LiDAR, once. I think.
Drones and LiDAR, or LiDAR mounted on drones, more than likely.
And bathymetric LiDAR, term I didn't know existed before reading this, but it makes perfect sense.
Absolutely. So I think what most of this boils down to, and Paul, tell me if your reading said something a little bit different, but what a lot of this just boils down to is photogrammetry, to be honest, and using LiDAR and things like that to enhance the photogrammetry. But really, photogrammetry from multiple sources, bringing it all into one massive model that they can use. And they've got some pretty great photographs in this and pictures.
They do. I wish they'd gone into a little more details as to what they used to combine these, because a lot of the discussion they have is about combining various disparate 3D data sets. So LiDAR and photogrammetry, above ground, underwater, aerial borne, UAVs, all the above, all mixed together. They talk about GIS a little bit. They talk about photogrammetric programs for assembling these things, but there isn't much in the way of a how-to, which is fine. That's not what this article's purpose was. This article's purpose was to illustrate that it can be done, and it can be done at slightly different scales and for slightly different reasons. But I would have liked to, the techie in me would have liked a little more detail as to how. But that's how, one thing, and I don't know if you touched on this a little bit. I had a little bit of a catastrophic brief Wi-Fi crash there at the end of the last segment. another thought that kept on winding through everything I was reading here, I was thinking about how they were discussing the landscape and about how terrestrial archaeologists tend to. And one of the things, you're talking about shipwrecks versus sunken sites, and they make that distinction as well. They were talking about the two broad categories of maritime sites that they deal with. And I thought, shipwrecks, I remember forever topographic maps being an important part of understanding any shipwreck. The taphonomic processes, what happened after that ship went down, how it broke apart, how the contents got scattered, what happened to the currents that moved things this way or that way. And we don't normally think about site formation with archaeological sites above ground, well, not above ground, terrestrial archaeological sites in that same way. And we kind of have a basic understanding of it, but it's not normally part of the discussion. It seems that it's pretty foundational to dealing with a shipwreck site. And so I think that kind of informs in a very deep way the way the maritime archaeologists think about sites and their formation versus the way that we terrestrial archaeologists do. And I'm just going to do a little brief illustration that has nothing to do with maritime archaeology. But in 98 or 99, I worked on a site in Syria, and it was a typical tell site, very small little pimple of a site with, most of the important buildings up on the high part of the pimple and everything else kind of spread out on a low tell around. There was two different projects working on the site at the same time. One of them was doing a step trench down the steepest part of the high part of the tell. And we decided that we were going to try to find some of the outlying, well, not outlying, but some of the lower tell, some of the probably residential areas. So we picked a flat spot, and we dug through that flat spot for about 2 meters before we gave up on it, because we found nothing other than silt and very few artifacts of any kind. It was mostly, we gave up on it because we realized it was just the dirt runoff from the high part of the tell on down onto the lower part of the tell. And so then we moved to a different part, another edge, right where the city wall would have been, the ancient city wall. And then we could hit more architecture again. But on that flat part, because we weren't used to thinking of the site formation in terms of what happens after the site had been abandoned. We think of the site formation as how it is built up, why we have a tell there, but not so much what happens after that tell's been abandoned. And we have, centuries of wash from the upper part down onto the lower part. We wasted a lot of our time digging a big trench of nothing. That I feel is something that the maritime archaeologists, certainly the people writing this article, would not have made. I think that would have been an understanding of theirs from the get-go, is that how to deal with the site after it happens. I mean, because a shipwreck site isn't a site generally until that ship goes down in that spot.
Yeah.
And then from there on out, it's entirely taphonomic processes, what's happening to it. So that was an interesting way, I thought, of looking at it, very kind of inverted from how I'm used to thinking of sites, but it kind of wends its way through their entire discussion.
Yeah, it does. And I think just as an aside, like you mentioned, the underwater sites, unless there's something still kind of sticking out, or maybe it's not that old or there's not a lot of sediment flow in that area and it hasn't been buried very deeply. But I mean, because of the way sediment does settle in a water environment, it really smooths out, unlike the centuries it takes for that to happen in a terrestrial site because of wind and water and things like that. But in an underwater site, when sediment lands, I mean, it just kind of flows out and spreads out and nice and evenly and really hides everything super easily. So trying to find stuff underwater has got to be just ridiculously hard. In fact, it's sort of timely that we're doing this, but what is it? Herodotus's boat or something like that was just found, or something he mentioned. That's like a 2,600-year-old shipwreck or something that was found in the Mediterranean just recently. I know we probably should have brought that up. I'm just now remembering that. Probably should have. Let me see if I can't link to that in the show notes at the very least. Just looking at this stuff and how all this ties together, I think that's just making me think about this article and the photographs and illustrations that they have in here, because they really do a good job at showing you throughout. They start with individual techniques and say, well, here's an example of this, here's an example of that. And they come on down, and then you get down to close to the end of the article, and there is exactly what they're talking about. Figure 14.8 in the article, if you're following along on page 225, has a multi-data set 3D working environment, that's what they call it, of the coastal prehistoric I don't even know how to say that. I think it's a Danish site. Hajama, I don't even know. Site and landscape showing several layers of aerial and underwater photogrammetry indicated with LiDAR data. I mean, this is it right here. This is some of the best archaeological map data reconstruction that I've ever seen. Because we've talked about a lot of stuff on this show, but it's usually one or maybe two aspects of these technologies. And these guys did everything and brought it all together in a single data set. And the nice thing about the way that we do these things is if you have mappable points in space, well, that's all the system needs to bring it all together. If you can create a map that has a 3-dimensional point in space, you can bring all these maps together. And I'm pretty sure stuff like Photoscan and which is now Metashape. I'm still going to call it Photoscan though. I'm pretty sure you can bring those in and have that done. Like you can bring in different LiDAR and other data sets as long as it's like point cloud type data that it can read and then just bring into your own system. And yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the few products that they actually do mention by name in here.
Yeah.
Is Photoscan.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. So anyway, I just think it's really cool. And I'm trying to think, this really should be applied to, I would say, most coastal sites. And one of the cool things would be to see in areas like up here in Nevada, half of Nevada used to be underwater. That's why it's called the Great Basin. After the end of the last ice age, it was called Lake Lahontan, and it was a big inland sea, and it filled much of the area to the east of the pretty much between the Sierras and the Rockies. I mean, it was a lot of area covered by this lake, and so we have a lot of coastal archaeological sites that are, of course, in the high desert now, and you can just see the different water lines when you're at some of these basin areas where there might be a little lake there now, but usually it's a playa or something like that. Everybody's heard of the playa for Burning Man. It's a playa because it used to be the bottom of a lake. So while I'm not sure if the Native Americans way back in that time were constructing boats, I know they had like reed boats at some point, but I'm not sure what kind of any maritime culture that they had that would have been found now. I'm actually really sketchy on that kind of detail. But we do find sites that were around the lake edge where they were utilizing those sorts of resources. And, given seasonality, sometimes those would have been buried and sometimes not. But we can use these different techniques to bring all that together and then maybe bring in the water as an illustrative technique and show where this would have been and how it would have changed through time. I don't know if this applies, but it's making me think about it.
No, again, what they're doing great here is not just mixing in the different kinds of data sets, which is neat. I think we're all going to be doing that, but also, and as we've mentioned before, blurring that line then between the terrestrial and the maritime. And you can, on that figure 14.8, at first glance, you don't even notice which part of it is above ground and which is submerged. It takes a moment to look at it. And then that fluidity, no pun intended, between whether or not something is dry land or submerged is it's going to change through time. And even places that have a relatively constant coastline, if people are utilizing it, people are doing things up on the coast, on the dry land, and then down in the water. They're building things, which is something that gets mentioned in the article. They are maybe fishing and bringing the fish back onto the land to process. There's this interplay, this human interplay between what's happening on land and in water that again, the maritime archaeologists seem to really grok and that we have to think about more deeply. And I think that can really be turned around and applied towards, in a purely terrestrial environment, landscape studies. We have a lot of trouble defining what a site is. I mean, maybe not you in CRM, because you probably have legal definitions of what makes a site. Right. Every grad student's project anywhere in the Middle East, every survey project has a different definition of what they want a site to be. Is it standing architecture? Is it a tell? Is it a certain density of assured scatter? Is it, how do you deal with roads? Are road sites? Sure, they can be, depending now a road linking two different cities. Are those all the same site? Maybe in a landscape sense they are, maybe not, depending on what your research design is. So what? I'm muddying the waters even more. Again, I didn't mean to make that pun there, but of extending the boundaries, using these various kinds of data collection to blur the lines between what's the site and what's not the site, between what's underwater and what's above water. to expand our viewpoint as archaeologists, I think that's really good, is to step back a little bit, take a slightly broader overview of the site itself or the region, the landscape, whatever scale we're working at, and then zoom back in on the research questions that really interest us, whether they're more purely taphonomic, whether it's something very specific about how something was done or who lived where when, or any of a million different questions you could ask. But this is, again, just a refreshing way for me to have looked at it, because it does raise a whole bunch of questions, maybe that I've thought before, but definitely with a fresh set of eyes.
Near the end of the article, they start talking about, they've got images here that look like they're from a video game, which are realistic because from that standpoint, because they're talking about using the Unity gaming engine, which everybody's using these days, to really put together a landscape that you can manipulate and move around in. And I mean, these things are just so powerful, which, Paul, I don't think we've talked about this yet. When I was at the Society for California Archaeology meetings, I met this guy who's working for this, he's actually working for a tribe in Southern California. And some of the things that he's doing with these guys, because, well, let me back up a little second here, because using this Unity gaming engine to bring all these data together and really making it come to life and look really lifelike and manipulatable has two benefits. One, it allows archaeologists to revisit a site that they might not be able to revisit. So you can go there virtually and really, really absorb what the site is, not just looking at maps, not just looking at data, but really stand there and observe the site and even start doing things like, well, what did this look like 10,000 years ago from an environmental standpoint? And let's add that layer in, let's see what that looks like. And where was the water level 5,000 years ago? Let's play with that and see how it affects the site. Mm-hmm. And not only just looking at it as a computer model, but standing there from a virtual reality standpoint, put on your goggles and get into the site from wherever you're at, from whatever time frame you're at, removed from when these data were collected. So that's great from a scientific standpoint, but also from a public archaeology standpoint. I mean, how many people get to go here and see these things? I mean, this was up in Scotland. They did a lot of this, and then over in Denmark as well. And I mean, while the locals might have an easy time getting there, who else does? Honestly, and without great expense just to get over there and see these things. So from a public archaeology standpoint, I think collecting these kind of data are great. And this leads me back to the gentleman I was talking to at the Society for California Archaeology meeting. And I want to put this out there because I know people are collecting information like this, and it will allow us to share information a little better. Because that's one of the biggest things we always talk about, is how to share these highly accurate data with the public, because we don't want them knowing where this stuff is. I mean, that's what it all comes down to. And one of the things they're doing is they basically go out to an area. They'll map out an area that they're going to survey first. And they take these placards, the kind that you can print out from PhotoScan, like the markers, and they go out there and they record artifacts. And when they record artifacts and features, they don't actually take a GPS with them. They don't record any spatial data, no location information at all, but they record the photographs. They actually do photogrammetry out there. So they'll take a bunch of photographs so they can do photogrammetry later. And they'll record the textual information. They'll do all that stuff. And then instead of taking a GPS point, they just leave this marker on the ground. Okay. Then they'll take a drone and fly over and do photogrammetry of the entire area. And the drone reads those. PhotoScan, actually, when you bring all this together, will read those markers. And now PhotoScan knows where those markers are. So now all you got to do is put the model in a point in space. And what they do for that is they take a sub-meter GPS and they take super highly accurate averaged points in 4 different areas around the corners of the site. And I mean, you're talking about resolving a point for like 30 to 45 minutes, he said. They just leave it on there. They get the most detailed, accurate point that they can. And the beauty of things like PhotoScan is when you put all this stuff together, you put those 4 points in immediately. Once those 4 points are installed, the entire model has 3D representation. Like, where every single point is. That's why they don't have to take points on the artifacts. They know where the artifacts are. When they're finished, they can put the artifacts on the ground, the photogrammetry that they did for those. And now you can zoom in, you can move around the landscape, see where the artifacts and features are, see labels for them, and see all that kind of stuff. But if you don't have those 4 points in the corners, then you don't know where it's at. And the way that they manage this from the tribal standpoint is they're allowed to hand out this model to anybody that wants to see it. But the locations of those 4 corner points are locked away in a safe in the tribal offices. And they're the only ones that get to know where these landscapes are. So these landscapes are divorced from their overall landscape. It's just a tiny picture that is the site, and anybody can see that because you can't tell where it's at. Like there's absolutely no way. So I think that's the future of public archaeology right there. And it's not that hard to do.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And I think that's what this is leading to. I mean,
I definitely think so.
Yeah, if you had all this stuff here and you just took away the spatial data and said, well, here's this thing, but you don't know where it's at, then there's really no damage that can be done by showing it to anybody. Because this kind of site, like this last Unity gaming engine video here, or these pictures, I mean, this could be anywhere.
Right.
Honestly. Yeah.
I do think it's kind of funny. We had Sebastian Heath on a couple episodes ago. The talk that I heard him give most recently was about 3D tools for archaeologists, and it started with some fairly basic ones and ended up with gaming engines. And so we have a similar sort of overall arc to this article here, ending with gaming engines. I do think that it's really nicely done. The first images that they have in the article are of this castle in Scotland. There's an aerial photograph and a topo map made from photogrammetry, presumably from the same drone flights. Oh yeah, it says drone elevation values right there. Then the very end, the game engine shots that they have, the rendered, reconstructed castle over the little bay that it's looking out onto, is again of the same site. So they've kind of bookended their entire article with this one site in Scotland, but discussed obviously a number of different sites in between. So I thought that was just structurally well done on their part. Yeah.
So, well, I think that about wraps up our discussion of this topic. I would love to get a maritime archaeologist on again after reading this and having sort of a different concept of what this all means. Because before it's like, how do you take notes underwater? All that kind of stuff, But now really thinking about the landscape has just opened up so many more questions for me and how we can use all these different technologies to bring it together into a cohesive 3D data set that, we can share and show other people. So,
well, I do think that one thing that they don't mention this explicitly, or if they did, I missed it, but the kind of the blurring the line between the terrestrial and the maritime is going to be becoming increasingly important to us as terrestrial archaeologists in areas, coastal areas, because we're expecting that the coastlines are going to get flooded in many parts of the world with global warming as the water levels rise. And so being able to be more flexible about how we see the edge of the site and be able to, when we need to, look under the water and not just draw our maps to that water's edge is going to be increasingly important to get a realistic understanding of how these sites worked. And these sites can be any site, any coastal site, anywhere that'll be affected by rising waters.
Well, if we had the money, I would say one mandate that I'd like to see cities and counties do, at least in the United States, is take their coastal environments and do some overflights of them, do some overflights and get the initial, we need a baseline, right now we need a baseline picture that we can turn into photogrammetric models later on and understand where these are as the waters start to rise. And even if, hey, maybe something happens, maybe something crazy goes and the water starts to recede. Even then, we'd like to know where the baseline is now, and that's just something we don't have. We have satellite imagery, you're right, and we have historic satellite imagery because they save all that, but I think it's a little different than photogrammetry. But, now that I'm saying that out loud, you can probably produce a pretty decent photogrammetric model from the right satellite data that you have. So maybe you don't need to get the close-in, highly tight interval stuff if you're just trying to get a baseline picture of what the coastlines look like, but who knows? Anyway. It's something we should be thinking about, but that's just a fairy tale because if there's no mandate for it, nobody's going to pay for it.
Huh?
That's right. Even if we didn't do the heavy photogrammetry, because that's what takes so long, is doing the actual stitching together of everything. Even just the flights, those are expensive. Even if you're just using drones, it's still expensive. And then you got to store all that somewhere. These guys on one of these, they mentioned, God, I don't remember which one it was, but on one of these early on, they mentioned taking something like 6,000 photographs. And I think it was of this boat, this underwater photogrammetry, 6,000 images to produce a 3D record. And it doesn't even look like that big of an area that this boat is spread out in, but just 6,000 pictures. That's what it took. So we've just got an image of it here, but I'd love to be able to see the actual 3D representation of this. That'd be pretty neat. So, all right. Well, Paul, any final thoughts on this before we head on to the app of the day segment?
No, I think we pretty much exhausted everything I can say about it other than, wow, this is so cool. It's really neat when you see a subfield of our field that you have very little understanding of, and you can learn a lot. Just even though it's not even intro to maritime archaeology, but I learned a lot just reading this article.
Yeah, right. So, yeah, I think it was good for anybody not familiar with what goes on down there. They do a lot of explanation and a lot of just baseline kind of here's what we're talking about stuff, which I really appreciate. They didn't just dive into a bunch of stuff. They really laid out what their thoughts were on the whole theory behind all this, which was really cool. So, All right. Well, we're going to take a break and we will come back in just a minute with our app of the day segment. Stay tuned for that. Back in a second.
Well, we got a minute. I'm going to buy that truck I've been wanting.
Wait, don't you need like weeks to shop for a car?
I don't. Carvana makes it super convenient to find exactly what I want.
Hold up. You're buying a car on your phone? Isn't that more of a laptop thing?
You can shop wherever you want.
I like to do my research, read reviews, compare models. Plus, Carvana has thousands of options. How'd you decide on that truck?
Because I like it.
Oh, that is a great reason.
Go to Carvana.com to sell your car the convenient way.
All right, welcome back to the Archaeotech Podcast, episode 103, and we're going to launch straight into our App of the Day segment. And I don't very often do this because, I don't know, quite frankly, when apps update, usually it's not spectacular. But I'm enjoying this app so much, and they just released a new update to their, I almost said update. That's kind of a cool word, you know?
Yeah, coin it quick. I mean,
I know, right?
Copy mark, trademark it, whatever.
That's right. So they released a new update to this app for desktop anyway. I haven't seen my mobile app update, but we'll see. But it's Timular. And I've talked about Timular before. It's a little time shifting cube thing where you can track different projects up to 8 different tasks, I guess, or projects, or however you want to assign it. But I thought the update to this was really good, and I've had a lot more time with the app as well, and I can speak about which pricing plan you should probably go with if you're gonna do this. So let me backtrack just a little bit. Timular again is a white cube. Now, I'm talking about this in the App of the Day segment because you can actually just go to timular.com, TIMEULAR, and download their app for free and use it. You don't need the cube. The cube is a nice visual indication that you need to switch your time, because sometimes we forget if you get a phone call and you've got phone calls on one of your sides, if you've got email, if you've got, somebody walks in the door, or you're messing around on Facebook and you want to track that is something. It's a nice visual indication sitting right on your desk that you have time that you're tracking and you need to flip it. But if you've got a lot of screen real estate, maybe you've got a multi-screen system and you can just have Timular up in a window there, then you can visually see that you need to switch the time. So feel free to use Timular for free without the cube. Okay. That's one thing I don't think people really understand. I've had others ask me about Timular, partly because I set up an affiliate relationship with the Archaeology Podcast Network as well. So if you do buy the cube, the APN gets a little bit of a kickback. In fact, I think it's a really good kickback. Timular, if you just get the cube, it's a one-time payment of $99, and I believe the APN gets like $20 on that because somebody's already bought one. So
nice.
It's a pretty good kickback for us. So if you go to arcpodnet.com/Timular, TIMEULAR. You can click on the link right there, and it'll just take you to the Timular website, and the affiliate link. All that does is, and if you purchase something through the website by clicking through to our link, then it tracks that back to us. So anyway, let me talk about the software real quick, the update. So I'm on Mac, and it updated across all platforms, and it works on Windows, PC, whatever you've got. And really what they did was they did something that was somewhat ingenious. Is on the normal tracking page, I guess, there used to be it would show you the thing that you were tracking, and then have a big one of those hollowed out donuts that was tracking around, marking your time. And then you could put the activity down there and everything you're doing with all the hashtags and @ symbols so you could track it. But now that's been replaced by basically a calendar view that shows me right now Monday through Sunday. So a 7-day calendar view starting on Monday. And it it puts entries right on the calendar view here as I'm going throughout my day. Now, it did that before, but you could only see one day at a time unless you went to the tracking section where you could then see a whole week or whatever range you wanted to see. So I think this is really cool and a nice way to visualize it. And it's really graphically stable, which means as I'm looking at a calendar entry here, it's a normal calendar entry as you're used to seeing on Gmail or whatever. There's a little thing in the bottom corner that's just got a little thing tracking around to show me that I'm currently tracking that time. And if I'm not tracking any time, then there's obviously nothing going on. So they made it more stable. They said people have been using a lot more hashtags to track everything. So they're just loading up with hashtags, and apparently their app was crashing because of that. I usually only use 1 or 2 hashtags to track stuff. I use an @ symbol to track, say, a client or large things. So let's say, for example, I have a podcast client, and I'll use the @ symbol to track her. So I've got her name under the @ symbol. And then, so I can search by that. And then within that, I can search the hashtags I have associated with her. So she's a podcast client. So I usually only have three hashtags, editing, recording, and consulting. So those 3 things are the 3 things I want to track within her overall, trackable, I guess, relationship. So anyway, go check it out, timemuller.com. And now I'm going to talk real quick about the pricing plans. So they've got Basic, Pro, and Lifetime. And Basic is just $99 for the tracker, and then the software is free forever. And then I first did the Pro version because they had a deal where basically you got the tracker for $49 and you got the Pro for $7, but you had to buy, what was it, 6 months straight off. So you basically paid the same amount for the basic tracker, but you got to try out the Pro software for free, basically for 6 months. That's how that worked out. And I think I'm off the Pro software now. I think I'm actually still paying for the Pro at $7 a month, but it's monthly or something like that. But just looking at this, the only things you get from the Pro software that you don't get with the free software is data export as CSV and Excel, which I've never once used. Integrations, in which they don't have very many, so that doesn't really seem very useful to me. Now, they do integrate with Toggle, which is another time tracker, which seems a little crazy that you would integrate this with Toggle. I guess if your company's already using Toggle, which I worked with a company that did before, and it's spelled TOGGL. Toggle's also a paid service. You can use it for free if you're not tracking very many things, but I guess the tracker will actually work Toggle, is how that would work. Jira, which is a project management software, and Harvest, which I have not used. Actually, I guess I do integrate it with my calendar. So when I do flip a time, there's a special Timemuller calendar that I have that shows me in that calendar view. But now I don't really need that because Timely just displays as a calendar. So anyway, I don't really think the integrations are that important unless you're solidly using one of those that they have. And then there's a weekly insights report, which I get that. It's just an email that summarizes my weekly time, which really just makes me more sad than anything else that I spent, 165 hours last week doing something. And then priority support, which sure, I've never needed support. So I guess that's good to have. So I don't know that that's worth $7 a month. If you are tracking this and you want to export your data as a CSV or Excel file so you can bring it into a timesheet application or something else, and you're really tracking this at work. Now, I work for myself, so I don't need to report to anybody. But if you were actually using this to report to someone, then that might be a useful thing, and you might want that export capability. But otherwise, I would say try this out for free, get the tracker, or just try the software and go from there. You don't need to click through the affiliate link if you're just trying the software because it's free, so you don't get anything from that. Then they have the Lifetime, which is tracker for $49 and the software for $299. There's no recurring payments. So if you think you're going to use this for the rest of your life, which seems unlikely, then you can pay $300 and have it for free forever. So that's pretty much it. Just an update to an app we've already discussed. And I literally use this every second of the day because I track times when I'm not working as well. I like to know how I'm spending my day. That's basically how I use it. So I track everything. I have an other face on my thing. And if I'm not near my desk, I just use it on my phone. And then under other, I have different @ symbols like my Civil Air Patrol time. It's not paid time, of course. I'm a volunteer, but I like to track how much time I spend at Civil Air Patrol. And I track other things through that other tab as well. So anyway, that's it for that. Just a really quick update on Timular. So definitely go check it out. And if you want to help support the APN, if you think you're going to buy one of those trackers, arcpodnet.com/Timular, TIMEULAR. All right. What do you got, Paul?
Well, I was just going to comment actually on what you were just saying, the data export, which is something you don't use because you like using Timular to find out how you're using your time. But it seems to me that the data export is custom made for anybody, or tailor made rather, for anybody who needs to report, for billing purposes, how they're using their time, how much time they spent on project A, B, or C. I don't know if it would work for somebody, for a lawyer per se, but certainly a lot of different kinds of consultancy jobs would benefit from something like that. And it's just as a general point, you and I have discussed data export in a bunch of different contexts, and we're always big fans of that.
Oh yeah. It's nice to get your data out. Like I said, I don't use it, but I imagine nearly every single other person that gets this would probably be reporting to someone because that's generally the rule. So yeah, you might need that, and your company would probably pay for it because it's saving you a lot of time on reporting. Yeah,
you potentially could. I mean, especially we were talking about it. I remember when you first mentioned it, and you were pretty excited to get your hands on it. And I mean that literally, get your hands on it because of the the physical gratification of taking and turning that cube around to its different faces as you track your time, which is an interesting, bring the real world into the virtual world kind of interface.
The other nice thing is that $7 a month, if you're going to get your company to pay for it, I mean, how much time? I remember when I was working for companies and we had to, every minute is billable. And so you have to spend time filling out your time card and, or at least tracking your time in some way. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you what, this is $7 a month, which equates to less than 25 cents a day, which I don't know how many billable hours that is for you. That's probably about 30 seconds worth. And if it's only costing you 30 seconds per day to track your time, then I think it's totally worth it if you look at it from a numbers standpoint.
Yeah, it could well be.
Anyway, yeah. All right, your turn.
Yeah, my turn. So this is going to be very brief because I haven't used this program particularly much other than just to say, wow, I'm really impressed by how deep it is. So backtrack a little bit. I mentioned a few episodes back how I purchased a used drone, and I've been learning how to fly it, and I am starting on the process of getting my Part 107 certification. Yeah, I'm hoping that that'll be a selling point, perhaps, if I can get some shovel bum work this summer. Mm-hmm. Anyhow, so in an off time, I was looking at what different kinds of software are available. The drone that I have is a slightly older one, and the software that DJI has for it doesn't do all the bells and whistles that newer drones do. But there are other software packages out there that fill in the gaps, do things like, follow a particular object or orbit around a given point or follow a track. One of the big ones is Litchi, and I think I might, at some point, that's paid software. It's $20 some. So at some point I'll probably pay for that just so I can test it out properly. But as I was looking, I found another class of software that was kind of interesting. It's planning kind of in the broader sense, not necessarily in the sense of what I'm going to do on this next flight, but how I'm managing my equipment. And so the one that I found that was really interesting to me is called Kitty Hawk. The website is kittyhawk.io, and it's available both on iOS and on Google Play. And it's, so it runs on your device, your phone or your tablet, and it is really astounding how deep it is. I use it. First thing you have to do is set up an account. But even at this point, to launch it takes itself seriously. I have to put in my thumbprint to actually get into the program on my own phone. And I look here, and it gives me a map of where I'm at. That makes sense. But it's also overlaid upon that is the FAA map, so I can see, if I can fly where I'm at currently. Mm-hmm. And in Manhattan I couldn't, but up in the country I can. I'm technically right at the very edge of the area around the Danbury airport. So like, I don't think I can fly in my front yard, but I can fly in my backyard.
Yeah.
Right at the limit. Anyhow, if you go to the website, you see what the software does. It says pre-flight planning. You can run checklists and so on. In-flight operations that basically takes over in place of the DJI Go app. And I've used this a couple of times, and it's very similar to the DJI Go app, but in my opinion, it's slightly cleaner. The interface is a little bit pared down, a little more intuitive for me. That's your mileage may vary kind of thing. But I like it. You can get your authorizations directly through the app, live streaming, and this is its big selling point is team operations. So if you have a fleet of drones and a team of operators, you can bring them all into the same account, and you can account for who's flying where, who's flying what, how much time is being logged on a particular drone, and so on. And that's what I'm saying. This is way deeper software than I need, but I love the interface for it. It's extremely clean and fairly intuitive for how much it gives, how much information it gives me. It gives me weather information right across the middle. I mean, if I look at the main screen, it gives me the map at the top, weather information across the middle, a whole bunch of information about the flight itself down below, the drone that I'd be using, whether I'm in good airspace or not, on down the line, the status of the drone. It links into the DJI app on my phone, so it actually downloaded all the flight information from previous flights I'd done with DJI Go. The pricing for it, if you're a single operator, is free, which is why I started playing with this. I don't know what the pricing is for teams because it says contact sales. They treat themselves like enterprise software, and it shows, and I'm sure it's priced accordingly. But the other interesting thing about Kitty Hawk is that one of the drone management kind of software things that you'd mentioned at episode 90 was Before You Fly, which is the FAA's software to tell you if you can fly where you're at. And you'd mentioned at the time that it's kind of rough around the edges. And as I was looking, before I ran into Kitty Hawk, I saw something that's on a forum online talking about Before You Fly and the same sorts of complaints that you'd brought up. So like, yes, it's useful, but it's really clunky. And apparently Kitty Hawk has won the contract to redesign for the FAA Before You Fly. And so looking at the quality of their own software and seeing how much of Before You Fly is kind of already rolled into Kitty Hawk, I kind of have a sense that they're going to just cleave some bits off of their flagship app and call it Before You Fly and sell that back to the FAA, who can then give it away to us. But interesting world out there. Lots of stuff I didn't know anything about, and it's always interesting to me to see what kinds of software, what kinds of solutions people are finding to their particular sets of problems. Because since I'm just a beginner at this whole drone world, this particular sets of problems are all brand new to me.
Yeah. This is pretty cool software. I'm definitely going to have to check this out. I'm really interested.
I think you would like it particularly.
Yeah, I'm really interested in the FAA authorizations right in app. That is kind of amazing because that's one of the biggest pains in the ass that you can do with this. I think they're based out of San Francisco, so I think they're being a little bit overzealous with their authorization that on the picture that they have on the thing here, because it says they're in the San Francisco's Class B airspace, which is pretty much, right there at the airport, or you're at a super high altitude, one of the two things. And then the FAA authorized flight operations. Now that's, I guess, not too out of the realm of possibility because, San Francisco airport is right in the middle of civilization, except for the part over water. So if you're going to fly at, say, a parking lot nearby, you're in Class B airspace that goes to the ground. And as long as you're not going to go over 400 feet, then you're probably fine, and that's, man, getting clearance to fly your drone in Class B, though, that's got to be something. Yeah. Anyway, I don't even like flying a regular plane in Class B airspace, to be honest. It's too nerve-wracking. Right. Anyway, this is really cool. I like it. And I like that it's free for one use, which they don't even say on their website. Like you said, it just says contact sales all over it, which means it can't be cheap once you go.
Well, if you do click the contact sales, you see Solo Pilot, download the free Kitty Hawk app here. And they have, they've got a web component so that, if you're a team leader, you can maintain contact with everybody else that's out in the field right there through your web browser. It's really, It's really cool. And I've only scratched the surface of it. And I think being a solo operator, I only ever would just scratch the surface of it. But again, it's really neat to see what kinds of solutions are out there for problems that I didn't even know existed. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I don't know if this can be useful with our topic today, which was maritime technology, because the FAA doesn't really care if you're under the water or not. But we were talking about drones over the water and combining all that stuff and bringing it all into one. So this might be something handy for people working in that space, or really anyone that's a fan of this. And you're not even listening to this part right now because you're so hammered because we said drone so many times.
Yeah, I'm sorry if you're playing the dronking game.
Nice. All right. So check out the show notes for this episode, arcpodnet.com/archaeotech/103. Learn all about Timular. I'll go ahead and put the affiliate link right in that in the show notes link, so you don't have to click too many times. And then check out this Kitty Hawk software as well, which we'll have in there at the same time. Especially if you're just a small company and you need that FAA authorization, which you do, no matter where you're working. If you're using it for commercial use, you need FAA authorization. So just keep in mind too, if you're also on BLM line or something, you also need BLM authorization or Forest Service authorization or whatever federal agency you're working for. And as I was talking to somebody just a few days ago, and they didn't realize this, if you're in a national park, you're not going to get authorization. It's just not going to happen unless you're working directly with the national park or something like that. It's just off the table for national parks from what I understand. So unless you're directly working for them or on a project that's being paid for by the National Park Service, there might be some stuff there. And I'm just saying maybe. But if you're going camping this summer or you're going traveling this summer, don't try to fly your drone in a national park. So it's not wise, and it's not going to happen. Plus, there's so many people around. It's just not a good time. So
right.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, Paul. That was a great app, and I'm excited to check it out. And we'll talk to you guys next time. We've got a great interview coming up on the next show with Edward Gonzalez Tennant, and talking all about the projects he's working on and some interesting tech stuff. So come back and check that out. All right. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to the Archaeotech podcast. Links to items mentioned on the show are in the show notes at www.arcpodnet.com/archaeotech. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com and paul@lugal.com. Support the show by becoming a member at arcpodnet.com/members. The music is a song called Off Road and is license free from Apple. Thanks for listening.
This show is produced and recorded by the Archaeology Podcast Network, Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle, in Reno, Nevada, at the Reno Collective.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.arcpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Thanks again for listening to this episode and for supporting the Archaeology Podcast Network. If you want these shows to keep going, consider becoming a member for just $7.99 a month. That's cheaper than a venti quad eggnog latte. Go to arcpodnet.com/members for more info.
America. We are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. By honoring your sacred vocation of education, you impact your family, your friends, and your community. At Grand Canyon University, our online bachelor's, master's, and doctoral education degree programs allow you to balance online coursework with observational and hands-on experience in the field. Find your purpose at GCU. Private, Christian, affordable. Visit gcu.edu.